So here's my testing equipment for the oxygen absorbers. I want to test the oxygen absorbers. Each batch that I get, I buy them 1,000 at a time, and I want to test them a minimum of 3 times. Once when I first get them, once partway through the batch, and then once near the end. Make sure that they're staying effective. First, you get a big container like this, and then you eat all the pepperoni sticks out of it. Step 1 is almost done. There's only a couple of pepperoni sticks. I'd meant to show our method of checking our oxygen absorbers when we get a new pack and open them quite a while ago. Well, now I have to finish it because we just opened the new pack of oxygen absorbers. We tend to buy them 1,000 at a time in the 10 packs, and they just got opened. We've been using one of these types of containers for checking the oxygen absorbers for quite a while, and I have a new one of these, well, newly emptied. So we're going to show how we mark this and measure this. The ones that we're using are 300 cc most of the time, and this is more than enough space to check for 300 cc oxygen absorbers. So let's try this out. I'm using grams to weigh the water I put in the container because with water, milliliters, grams, and cubic centimeters are all the same number, so it's easy to work with. So the first thing we're going to do is fill it up, find out how much it holds. And I kind of already know because I've done this before, but we'll fill it up. So I know that this will hold 2,200 grams, which again, 2,200 milliliters. But the question is, do we want to use just 2,100? So if we use that level and drill a hole at that spot in there, then from here up, when we turn it over, will be 2,100 cubic centimeters of air. So the water will be able to go into that level, and then it will be drawn in through those holes, of course, and then fill it up as the oxygen is absorbed. I hope I'm explaining that in a way that makes sense. So first, we're going to mark that spot. And again, we have a little bit more of space, but it's hard to get it into the water exactly straight up and down. So if I use this spot, I'm probably better off. So I'm going to take it off the scale. Now, so I'm putting a mark on each side. All right, now we'll be able to use that mark as our ending point, basically. So we want to know where 100 cc's from that is 200, 300, and so on. Once I drill the holes at that location, that will hold 2,100 cc's. The amount of oxygen in there, theoretically, will be 441 cubic centimeters. And I assume all of this would actually be at sea level because there would be the partial pressures, the 21% would be the same here, but it's going to be a lower amount of actual oxygen. But this is close enough for what we're doing. At least I hope it is. If it's not, we'll change it. With 441 cc's of oxygen, the maximum height it could go up to, again, we're looking at this upside down. So if we get this to 1659, that would be the 21% down. So we'll go to 1659. So 1659. So that amount right there is the oxygen amount, assuming this was all air. We're going to mark that level. Well, I'm going to make sure I put it on the counter in case there's any inaccuracies with level on the scale. Right, there's the 21%. So that's our 21%. Now I want various other amounts on there so we can see how much. That would be 441 cc's of oxygen. So a 300 cc one would, of course, be less than that. I don't know how many marks I need in there. I could do it. I don't think it's going to show up if I do them too small. So let's go to 300 cc. 1800 would be 300. So let's go to 1800 and put a mark there. 1800. Again, I'm going to set that off of there. That little bit is the 300 cc amount. So when I'm using a 300 cc oxygen absorber, it only needs to move it that far. And I'll let that stabilize out. Now I want to go at least to the 100 and 200 marks. So that would be 1900. That'll be the 200 mark. Now to the 2000 mark. So that would be 100 cc's down from the water line, from the mark. Now I do want to find the 400 spot. So there's my 1700. So that's all the marks I'm going to use on this. There's our number parts. This is where the hole's going to go. That's 100, 200, 300, 400, 441. Theoretically, could make it up to that line if it takes everything out of it. These oxygen absorbers say they're 300s. That means it should bring it to that line to get to the 300. I suspect we'll get to the top if it's the same as previous batches. But for now, I'll go ahead and label these 441, 400, 300, 200, and 100. That's how I've got my measurements. I'll drill the hole with the top of the hole being at that spot right there. And then we'll have 100 cc's, 200, 300, 400, and 441, which is the theoretical maximum from here, the rest of that air. Unless I've done something completely crazy wrong, in which case, let me know. I'm going to try to drill this so that it's the top of the hole is right at the middle of the line. If I get it too low, it's pretty easy. I can just file it a little higher. It was pretty tough plastic for a really bad bit. And of course you could use a hot needle or something and melt a hole through there. That's for the water to go in. Let's test it. So as I mentioned, we just got our latest shipment of the oxygen absorbers. And then they come in this bag that has 5 10 packs. And then each of those is a 10 pack inside there. Open one of these and tape it to the inside of that container so that it can absorb the oxygen. And I think later I'll put some kind of clip in it. And ideally I should also measure these because this is going to be a couple of cubic centimeters or so. So it's already going to displace a little bit of that air. But like I said before, this is kind of a rough estimate. This isn't really good science, or I would have to do a lot better job at it. It's good enough for the rough estimates I want to know. Is it still working at least 300 cc's or 400 or 500? So let's get it started. Dang it. I still forget to hit record sometimes. So I took one of the packets out of here and then I added an oxygen sensor from one of the packets inside there and taped it on. I'm just putting a piece of tape on there and then I'm going to just stick it to the side up here. Now this will go into the container, and I added some food color to the water to make it a little easier to see. I'm just trying to lower it gently and level so the water goes up to the level of that hole. You can see the marks on there, and then I'll just put a weight on top of it to hold it down. And I should have checked to make sure this table is level, but that's going to be as close as I'm going to get on this. Let this go. Move it in close. 300 cc is right up there, and we're not even above yet. So this isn't, I think I need to figure out something a little different to see it easier on camera. It's real easy to see it in person. It's just a little bit harder to see here. We'll come back and watch that. We're already up to 250, and it's been, I think, about 4 hours. I'd planned on just leaving it running for a short time and then putting this back here on the tripod tomorrow because I didn't think it would do much today. So I was surprised at how fast it went already. But I can't leave this overnight like this because I didn't plan ahead for that. So I'll put it back in the morning, but I'll leave the tripod sitting at the same spot and see if I can line it up about the same. I'll just leave this running until tomorrow and we'll check it then. So this is about 12 or 14 hours later, and it's just about to the 400 cc mark and still rising very slowly. When I came down and checked it a couple hours ago, it was, another line, about the width of that line lower. So it's still coming up slowly. And I'm not sure if I kept enough water in it originally, so I may have sucked a bit of air earlier, but I don't think so. I think it's okay. We'll check again on this even later, see if it comes up. But again, this is a 300 cc oxygen absorber for the rating, and now it's done almost 400. Here's the package, so you can see that the oxygen sensor has gone back to the salmon color now. We'll come back and check it again later. Midway through the next day, and you can see it's still just below the 441. And that was a 300 cc oxygen absorber, so I don't know if it's going to go any higher anyway. But I can still leave this go and see how much more it does, if anything. So we'll check in on it again later. I was working on the video for how to tell how much oxygen an oxygen absorber can absorb. And a viewer commented about how to do the testing, and the timing was perfect because I was doing some testing. But I think I misunderstood what most people want to know. My methodology for testing the oxygen absorbers will tell me how much oxygen an absorber can absorb. I don't think most people care about that. I think most people actually want to know, will it take all the oxygen out of this bag and keep it safe long term? Well, that's a different question, really, and I hadn't really thought of it that way. So the comments went back and forth about, couldn't you just put one of the little sensors in the bag? Well, yes, you could, but how would you see it? If you use a clear bag, they don't work as well as this bag, so it doesn't exactly give you the information about this bag. Then when I realized, at least I think this is true, that most people don't care if the 300 cc oxygen absorber I'm using in this bag can absorb 400 versus 450 cc's or 350, they want to know, will it do more than the 300 necessary for this bag, or at least as much as necessary for this bag? Because again, this quart bag will never have 300 cc's of oxygen in it at first. So even if you didn't put any food in here and you blew it up like a balloon, a 1 liter bag, which would be slightly bigger than the quart bag, is only going to have about 210 cc's of oxygen. So it's not really an issue. Those comments from the viewer made me start rethinking my whole process for testing the oxygen absorbers. If the question isn't exactly how much can it absorb, but whether or not it can get this bag down to 0, well, then I should test these size of bags or these sizes of containers with the oxygen absorber. So I'm going to try this jar. So I think any container that will be airtight would work. This container can hold 1,025 cubic centimeters of air. Doing the math, that's approximately 215 cc's of oxygen. So I'm going to put an oxygen absorber in here and one of those oxygen sensors that comes with the packet, and put them in there and see if that oxygen sensor piece turns back to the pink or salmon color, showing that the oxygen has been absorbed. We already know from the other tests that it will do more than 300, do more than 400. Let's test it this way. This might be a simpler way for most people. You could have a pint jar, a quart jar, a 2-quart jar, just eat a bunch of pickles and you've got the jars necessary, and then put them in there. It doesn't even have to be a glass jar. A 2-liter soda bottle, a clear one, should do just fine because they're going to be very airtight. It should do a great job. Let's test this one first. So here's my plan with this test setup, and I'm going to put this here because then it'd be a lot easier to read. So this jar can hold 1,025 cc's of air, and multiply that by 0.21 for the oxygen, and we get 215 cc's of oxygen. Part of the point of that is that this bag could never have more than 215 cc's of oxygen in it, assuming just regular air. A slightly related question that comes up is about how they suck down. They all should go down by 21% if you've put an oxygen absorber in there and it worked properly. So if we have a batch of, say, 10 bags in a batch, they're all at the same time, all the oxygen absorbers are put in, and 9 of them go down like this and 1 of them doesn't. I'm going to suspect there's something wrong with that one that didn't. Either the bag is bad and so it's letting air in, or the oxygen absorber was bad, or the seal is bad. Something went wrong. So it's probably not a bad idea to leave them out for a day or two after you seal them and put the oxygen absorber, and before you put them in your bins for storage, to make sure that they worked and that they stay down. All of ours have done this almost every time. My sister recently did one where she had 9 or 10 bags, or some number of bags, and one of them did not suck down like this. She was doing rice, I think. One of them didn't get small. She changed it out, put a new oxygen absorber to make sure that what she stores is safe. So for some reason, one of them had some kind of problem. We couldn't figure out anything wrong with the bag. We don't know if the oxygen absorber had a problem, but it was out of the same bag with the other ones. So I don't know what went wrong, but something didn't work well with that particular one. You can see, usually you can see the textures of that. That's not 100% true for every type, but it usually is. And if you're doing a set of them, they all should be the same or very similar. So now I'm going to just simply throw both of these in there. Yeah, why not? We have plenty. Going to put both of those sensors in there, and we'll be able to see them right through there. I hate opening bags more than once. For other tests, I already have 2 bags with just 9. Well, now I'm going to have another bag with just 9, because I don't really like opening them more than once. So the second time I like to make sure I use them all. Here's one of the ones that has been opened and then resealed. And you can see it went back to kind of a salmon color. We'll take this new one, I'm going to take one out, put it in here, and then I'll reseal the bag. So there's the sensor. I'll try to hold that still so we can see it. And now it's turned already. Okay, we'll get that in there, get this resealed, and we'll get this put on there nice and snug. So it'll be real easy to see if those turn back to the salmon color. And that will tell us whether or not all the oxygen has been absorbed out of this container. Now this is only 215 cc's, but as I said, that's more than will ever fit in this bag, because this is slightly bigger than this bag as far as if this is puffed up like a balloon and there's no food taking up any space, it still is not quite as much volume as this jar. We'll come back and check it later. Right, this is looking through the jar, and you can see that oxygen sensor is, well, both of them are starting to turn back to pink. I wonder if it's faster with a bag. I could probably use a seal meal bag for a short-term test. I certainly wouldn't store anything in it long term, but for a test it might be a good choice. You can see that oxygen absorber is also starting to turn back to pink. And you can see it just right at the bottom of that 441 mark. And the sensor, I don't know if we can see that in this lighting, it's starting to turn back to pink. A few days later, I wanted to show this. Hopefully this will show up. Come on. You can see the oxygen sensors in there. They've turned back to the pink or salmon color, showing that all the oxygen has been absorbed from this. And this is a quart jar. Actually, this jar is a little bit bigger than a liter total, so 1,025 cc's. And that would mean that there's about 215 cc's of oxygen in there. I use the 300 cc oxygen absorber, so it's more than enough to take care of all the oxygen in there and any oxygen that gets in there later, which for a glass jar with a metal lid, you shouldn't have to worry about anything getting in there later. With all of the bags, I do have to worry about that. But I realized that most people don't really care, probably. Can their 300 cc oxygen absorber do 350, 400, 412? They just want to know, will it take care of all the oxygen in that bag and then have room or ability to do a little bit more after that? One of the things that we could do with this jar is, since we know that it's done 215 so far, we could open this jar, let air in, and do it again to see if it'll take out another 215. That would be 430. That's well over what it's rated, and that could be worth doing. Now that we have it to here, we can go ahead and do that and see what happens. We'll open it, refill this with regular air, so we'll have that much oxygen again. So just trying to push any of the air back out. You can see those immediately went back to blue. We'll put them back in there, seal it back up, and come and revisit this in a few more days again. It could take a week or so to get all that back out of there again. So we'll come back and check it later. In the meantime, I have 5 oxygen absorbers left in this bag, and I'm going to put them in a couple of plastic bags. I'm using a quart freezer bag and a little bit more than a quart's worth of food saver bag. Now, I would never consider using these for long-term storage for freeze-dried food because they just don't do the job. They're the wrong kind of plastic, they're too thin, they're going to let oxygen and or moisture through it much faster than the Mylar bag. They're not light resistant, they're clear. So they're just not made for the job. But for this test or for short-term things, a few weeks maybe, I wouldn't have any problem using this if I were going to go on a trip and know that I'm going to use up those items during that trip. It could be a very inexpensive way to accomplish the job. And I also have some walnuts that have been washed, and those are going to get oxygen absorbers, but those are going in the freezer. Now I have a couple more sensors. One will go in each bag, and we'll get these out. And then, oh, I could have used those sensors. Well, I can add those to it. And it seems like the second time around that these react much slower. You can see how much longer that's taking. So we'll add one of these to each bag. Going to make sure that they're full of air. And I know that that's blowing into it. That adds a little bit more, a little less oxygen, but that's what I've got. Now I'm going to heat seal it up here. So I've got it heat sealed right across there, and then we'll be able to watch that over time. We'll do the same thing with this. I'm going to seal it at an angle so that I leave one space so I can get some air in there first. So I've got it sealed partway across with just an area, and you could do it straight across and then cut it a little bit, and that would be a perfectly acceptable method. In fact, it might work easier. There we go. So those bags of air We'll come back and visit them later and watch to see what the sensors do. Looks good. We'll see those later. The last thing I want to show is, so we've got the one in the container here. You can see the sensor on that. It actually was more pink than that. I messed up on it. I didn't pay attention to how low the water was getting, and some of the water glugged out and a little bit of air went back in, but it's still keeping it oxygen free in there. It's February 3rd. We put these in on January 31st, so now it's 3 days later and about 6 more hours, 5 more hours, so 3 days and 5 hours. And this is the one that we had put that oxygen absorber in. We let it absorb all the oxygen and have the sensors turn back to pink. And then I opened it, put fresh air in, and did it again. So it's done it twice. That's more than 430 cc's of oxygen. The 215 here is more than you could ever have in a normal quart bag. Now it's done more than twice what you could ever have in a quart bag. We know that these 300 cc's will easily take care of a quart bag or even a 2-quart bag. Now these two have been the same 3 days, and it's their first time around. The sensors in this one are starting to turn a bit pinkish. They're kind of a purpley color instead of the deep blue, so that's starting to take care of the oxygen. And as I mentioned before, this bag is nowhere near as good as a Mylar bag, a quality Mylar bag. And this bag is nowhere near as good as this. I'm concerned that this one will never take care of it, but we'll keep watching it. You can see these are still deep blue. That one is showing some pinkish colors to it. And then this one, there we go. This is the sensor in the bigger container. This had already done 440, the full amount of water, and then a bit more for a second time. And why I say a bit more is because I messed up and let the water get below the hole, and so it glugged some of the water out and some air went in. But the point is that this 300 cc oxygen absorber did well more than 300 cc's and took all the oxygen out of there, and the sensor is now back to salmon. This size container is about 2200 cc's. And as you saw on the newer one, I drilled the hole at the spot that's about 100 up, so then it holds 2100. People have asked about vacuuming jars or vacuuming the containers. We could do that experiment using the harvest right by taking the rack out and putting a canning jar in there and then vacuuming it. To really do it well, we're probably going to have to vacuum it for at least 20 minutes to really make sure the air is out of it. Now, there is still going to be air in it, and that's the point. So the way to test it to make sure that we've got all the air out of it is we would have the canning jar lid sitting on top, and then as the pressure is lowered, that's going to push its way out. But as soon as you put the pressure back in the chamber at the end by opening the valve, it's going to hold that lid down. Anyway, that's going to seal it, and you're going to have a vacuum in there. Is it a full 100% vacuum, or is there still some oxygen in there? If we then took that container, put it underwater, and pop that lid off, the water is going to rise up and show how much air was removed. If there's an air bubble at the top, it's important to remember that that air is 21% oxygen. It doesn't take much oxygen to spoil the food. We need to get the oxygen out. A low oxygen isn't enough. We need to get it as close to 100% oxygen free as possible. Now it's February 5th. These have been in there for 5 days. I've said this a number of times, and I'll keep saying it. This kind of bag is not made for this job. 5 days later, these are still pretty much blue. I can see it kind of a hint of a pinkish color on these. The oxygen level is getting lower on this, but it's still not gone. And because of oxygen partial pressures and things. If the oxygen level is lower in there than it is out here, oxygen wants to get in there to equalize the oxygen levels from inside there and outside here. That's how it works. It wants to do that same thing here, it's just that it can't get through there. And it's hard to get through the Mylar bags. I think I need to take one of these and take off the silver part in just a very small part so we can tape on one of the sensors in a little window area. We'll do that. So basically, so far these are a bust. This one looks like it still has some potential. We'll let these keep going, see what happens longer term. They're holding air just fine, but I think oxygen is going through this plastic also, which it will. I'm going to do it again. Going to open it up and we'll watch the oxygen sensors. And again, it seems to take longer the subsequent times. The first time it goes very, very quickly. Let's get them out real quick. All right. Okay, and it's slowly, relatively slowly, turning back to blue. And we'll put this back in. And we'll close it back up. And we'll see if it goes back to the pink again, which would be a total of 645 cc's of oxygen. And that would be more than double what it's rated. So that would be a surprise if it goes that much. We'll watch it. So this is the other test that I was talking about, using a 2-liter bottle, which is about 420 cc's of oxygen, because of course 2 liters would be 2,000 cc times by 21% be about 420 cc's of oxygen. We're going to put one of the oxygen absorbers in and a couple of spare sensors. I'm going to leave the label on for now because that way we can still return it for deposit. Let's get an oxygen absorber, and of course we'll have to kind of fold it and get it in there. And I've got this bag of sensors that have one oxygen absorber and has been in here for 1.5 years with just a single oxygen absorber, and it's still showing that it's oxygen free in there after 1.5 years. Let's start with the oxygen absorber. And we'll get one out. The sensor is turning, there it goes. And with these, with so little air in there and so many oxygen absorbers, it only takes a few hours to go back to the salmon color on that. Okay, so should be able to kind of fold that and just stick that right in. Oh, getting it out could be difficult. Oh well. I didn't think of that. I should tie a string to it or something. Doggone it. Should have thought of those things. Well, maybe if I just tape it up, tape it together. So I'm going to tape it, then I should be able to shake it back down, because I'll want to be able to take it out later. Okay. I think, yeah, okay, I'll be able to get it back out. Now we'll get a sensor in there. I'm going to go this way. Grab a couple of these, and they do tend to change slower after they've been used before. And some of these are already completely purple, some of them are still turning. We'll put those in there and we'll seal it up. So this kind of bottle should be plenty airtight for the job. Now we can see through it, and we'll watch it. I'll put the time on there and the date on there. We'll know when it was started. All right, so we'll come back and visit that in a couple of days. The bottle should slowly get sucked in. Eventually, the oxygen should all be absorbed. Even though this is a 300 cc, I'm testing it at 420, so considerably more than what it's rated for, and I'm betting it'll work. It'll be enough. All of this brand have been well over what they've stated every time we've tried them. And these are all blue now, and we can watch those also. Well, we'll be back and check these later. In the meantime, these are not doing great. These are 6 days now. These are slightly pinkish. These are still deep blue, because this kind of bag just doesn't do the job. It's sealed, it's not losing any air. I mean, you know, it's not leaking, so it has gotten smaller, so it has taken care of part of the oxygen, but new oxygen is probably going through that bag. It's just not a good enough bag for this. This type of plastic is better, but I still don't think it's going to do the job. And it certainly doesn't do what the glass jar or this kind of plastic does. Well, we'll keep watching it and keep reporting on it. Back for hopefully a final check on this. That will be the final check. I'm going to empty it and restart it. It's February 11th. This is the big container that would have a maximum of 441 cubic centimeters of oxygen. However, it's also the one that I accidentally let the water get too low, so even though it was filled with nitrogen, was the only thing left in it, some water came out and more air came in, which then means there was a small amount of oxygen again, and so then it went up higher than the 441. That's the only reason it made it higher. But it's still oxygen free in there, which is the goal. So it really tells you that 300 cc oxygen absorber will do a little bit more than 441. Going to revisit these two for a last time. So this is the food saver bag, and hopefully you can tell that those are slightly less dark blue than what they do get when they're totally exposed to oxygen, but they never got pink. And the one in just a regular freezer Ziploc is still just a dark blue. Maybe we can get those closer together so you can see the color difference. So if I put those down this way, this down this way, there, you can see them both at the same time. Just a nice blue and a slight pinkish tint to it. Now, remember, I got another oxygen absorber out of this one, and this has just had one single one in there for more than a year and a half. And then on the 6th, I opened it and took one out, and all of these turned blue. Now they're back to the salmon color. And the ones that I took out, I put into the 2-liter bottle on the 6th. And of course it squishes that bottle right down. And in the 2-liter, there's going to be a little bit more than 420 cc's of oxygen. And so this 300 cc oxygen absorber took care of all 420 or a little bit more of the oxygen out of this 2-liter bottle. And of course, that's the goal. So this is probably the simplest way to test. So now I've tested a 300 cc oxygen absorber and shown that it will do more than 420. What more do I need to know? I'm not going to use it for anything that's going to require a 500. I'm going to use it for 300 or less. And so I know that it's going to be effective for more than 300. So let's end that test and move on to other ways. Tell me the method that you would like to see. We'll lift it to let water out and then refill it with air real quick, put it back in the container, and it'll go up some more.